Hello everyone, welcome to this session of Advanced Java. Today, this session is about Spring and Juice context dependency injection. I will show you two projects I've prepared already, so I don't have to type that much, but I will walk you through. One Juice project, that's the dependency injection framework made by Google, and one Spring framework, that's from the Pivotal guys who make the Spring what's it called, environment, this entire infrastructure that they provide. We will take a look at one single part, that's the dependency injection. Okay, so I've prepared my IntelliJ here and I've prepared a project. Actually, it's 3 projects in one. Let's start with the build Gradle to show you what's going on here. So I've created applications. That's probably a new plugin for you, which makes runnable classes. It can run main classes. That's what it actually does. It also depends on the Java plugin, so this is applied automatically. Also have my idea plugin. The rest is pretty much straightforward. I've declared some dependencies for all sub-projects. So I want commons lang in all sub-projects. I want log4j, the SLF4j, sorry, simple in all sub-projects. I want the root project to be compiled before all sub-projects are compiled. And I want JUnit node in all those sub-projects. You can see then as I declared one project juice over here. It just has one dependency, which is com.google.inject juice. So I have the dependency framework from Google in here. And all the stuff that it depends upon will be pulled in also. This is Guava, for example, which is a pretty neat library that Google made for Java applications. You will see some, or one application at least, in the code. The Spring also depends on Spring context. At the end I will show you the website of Spring for you to keep reading further on. I declared some main classes. That's for the application plugin. It's the Juice application, the Spring application, so we can run these. I declared a wrapper for Gradle to use Gradle 341. That's the setup. Let's keep going with the application itself. What we're going to do is a very simple project setup. We want animals and we want an animal service. We want to store animals and we want someone to be able to serve those animals. So what we need at first are the animals itself, which means I declared an interface here, interface animal. It just has 2 methods, talk and getName. So I want the name of an animal and I want the animal to make some noises. That's about it. I've declared 2 implementing classes, one cat and another dog, just straightforward. The cat has a member variable, the dog has it too. It's called name. It's in a constructor. The talk method is just a system out print line with some noise, some typical noise this animal makes. And the getName is just return for this member variable. That's it. I've put these 3 classes, or the 2 classes, one interface, in the root project. You just saw in the Gradle's dependencies for all subprojects that all subprojects depend on this project, so they all know what an animal is. That's it. Okay, let's start with the juice first. Juice is just one example. What dependency injection does? Let's start with the Lookup Service. Lookup Service is an interface, and the Lookup Service is the service to take care of storing the animals. So this is an decoupled class from the animal service. The animal service will use this lookup service later on. We will take a look at that in a second. But this is our service that takes care of storing data. However it does that, I don't care. At this point, to the outside world, as an API, I just have this one method, find animal by name, which means It takes an animal name and it returns a collection of all those animals. And of course I provided one implementation. It's a very, very easy one. A lookup service implementation implements lookup service. It has a list inside. This is one example, list.newArrayList, that I talked about at the Gradle dependencies explanation. This is a class that you can see it in the import statement that Google Guava provides. So lists.newArrayList is a convenience method to create a list by just supplying some elements that should be in there. Okay, what else is interesting about this lookup service implementation? It of course has to implement this find animal by name method. You can see in front here there's a little implementation icon that IntelliJ shows us, which means this implements or overrides interface method. This is straightforward. It just searches through all these items in this collection up here and returns the one that have the same name. Because we have a getName method, we can use this one to check against the one that the parameter that's given to the method here. Easy peasy. We have one annotation up here on this lookup service, and this annotation is javax.inject.singleton, which means for the dependency injection framework, this class, this lookup service implementation class, will exist only once. If you don't know what a singleton is, please go ahead and look it up. We can declare here at this point with this annotation how this service is being created and held in the dependency framework. The dependency framework will go ahead and take all those classes, and when we take a look at the animal service, which uses this class, we will see what this does. So now we have an animal service. The animal service has a method called take care of an animal. That's what this animal service is supposed to do. So this animal service gets the name of an animal. With this name, it will go ahead and ask the lookup service, okay, find that animal. If it got that animal, it will just do something. In this case, it will return this as a result here. But you can, it's just a convenience method, convenience implementation I used here. Very simple, not too abstract. You can think about doing anything with these animals at this point. The interesting parts are up here. The lookup service is a member variable of the animal service, and we use the inject annotation on the constructor. The constructor just has a parameter called lookup service. If we fire up the application, this lookup service is injected, which means the application builds up an environment or something outside this environment, some handler who picks up everything it knows, every class it knows, especially the lookup service, and it will provide this animal service at construction time with the lookup service we created in this implementation over here. This one is a singleton, which means there's only one lookup service. So this one is this lookup service that's created over here at the startup of the application is going to be injected here. Now this is, if you've never seen this before, this is pretty fancy because now you have a really, really decoupled application parts. This lookup service can be changed in any way you like, and you don't have to care about the exact implementation. In the previous, or in the before inversion of control era, you would have to write at the declaration line or in the animal service when you created something like, okay, take a new lookup service and do that here, put that here. Now this magic has to be set up, of course, so this doesn't work by itself. What I've prepared is the manual way. So let's take a look at the manual steps you have to take to set up this application. This is an interface. So in order to know, or for the application to know what implementation to use, we have to hook that up. That's done in a so-called juice module. So in the juice module, this is an abstract module. As you can see, I tried to avoid imports so that you can see inside the code where these classes come from. So this is a Google Inject abstract module. A module is something that's a configuration for the dependency injection. So what we do here is we bind the Lookup Service class, which is the interface, to this service implementation, which means whenever this Lookup Service is needed, this Lookup Service implementation is going to be provided. Now if we want to fire up the application, I created a juice application, which has a main class. Now this main class starts out with an injector, the Google Inject injector. The injector is the part of the dependency framework that collects all your classes, and it will create the dependencies. It will hold a so-called dependency tree. That means it will know that our animal service can't be created without a lookup service, and that the lookup service implementation doesn't have any other dependencies, which makes it a leaf of this tree. So the lookup service implementation is a leaf of this tree. The juice module provides the information that the lookup service interface should be instantiated with a lookup service implementation, and the animal service is a user of this lookup service. So we create an injector using the juice framework. We give it the configuration. Let's skip back to the configuration. It was just the binding of the lookup service to the lookup service implementation. And the injector is set up. Now what can I do? I can use the injector to give me an animal service, which means I cannot instantiate this animal service without the injector. If I would try to do that, I would have to provide some lookup service. Now that's the interesting part or that's something that changes in your mind when you just know basic Java. Now you want to do dependency injection. You don't create your services yourself anymore. You ask the providing dependency injection framework to do that for you. So injector get instance animal service.class provides me with an animal service that already has all the dependencies created for me, which means I will get an animal service that has a lookup service wired in there. Okay, so let's take a look what happens here if we call this. We call the take care of animal with the name of Molly. If we go back here, take care of Molly, we'll use the lookup service to find all the animals called Molly. We don't know how the lookup service works. That's decoupled now. If we go there, we only find the interface. We go into the implementation. Let's see how we set up this method. So in our collection, our data store, so to speak, is one dog called Molly and one cat called Molly, which would mean if this collection is traversed, we will find two animals. These get collected here, returned. And the animal service, it just takes all these animals and prints it out to the standard out. Oh, I didn't even use a logging framework here, I just realized. But it's just a showcase. So that's okay in this case. So let's start that. Okay, Cradle. This is the juice application and we want it to run. The output is in between the Gradle commands, taking care of dog Molly. So we printed out the class of the animal we found and taking care of cat Molly. So this actually worked. By just creating an injector, providing it with a juice module, calling the animal service take care, and having the injector provide this instance of the animal service. That's the juice way. Now this juice module still is a little bit cumbersome. There are ways, of course, to avoid this, to have this auto-configured. Because if you only have one implementation of the lookup service interface, then of course the application can find that by itself. But we're not going to take a look at this right now. Instead, I will show you a really cool advantage of dependency injection, which gets clear or becomes clear if we take a look at the test. So I've created an animal service test. It's supposed to test this animal service. Animal service just has a constructor. The constructor needs a lookup service. And after that it has a take care method. So let's close the other classes so we don't get confused. What have I done? I need an injector. You remember in the application we created an injector that scans all the classes using the module configuration and provides us with all the implementations, all the instances. Of course I need an animal service because I want to test this service. So this is the service under test. Let me expand this here. In the setup, what do? Well, we create an injector. And now what do? We provide the create injector class needs a module, an abstract module. We provide here an anonymous inner class, a new abstract module. And we have to override or implement this configure method. And instead of providing the lookup service implementation that we used in our production code, in the test code we use a mock lookup service. Now this mock lookup service class I implemented down here. So this mock lookup service implements a lookup service, which means it has to override this method find animal by name. And in this case, I just return always the same collection with just one element, a dog called Alfie. And now we can use this injector to get the instance of an animal service class, which means in our test setup, just for the unit test, we created or we injected actually a different lookup service for the same actual animal service. We just changed the implementation that's provided by the dependency injection framework. That's a really, really great advantage. If you compare to the old way, the non-inversion of control, non-dependency injection way, where you have, let's go back there. If you have the declaration over here, right? Now the test itself is just straightforward. In the setup, we create this animal service and a tear down. We have it set to null so that the garbage collector can take care of it. We call the method with the name Molly and we see there's nothing in there. And we check that the animal that's returned is called Alfie. But the most important part, what I wanted to show you, is that you have the ability or the chance to change the return values inside your dependency framework. That's the really important stuff. What I've done here is I did that per hand or manually, so to speak. What you also can do, and what we will do later, is use profiles. In Spring, for example, we will use Spring later on. They're called profiles, and you can set up different profiles for production and testing environment, which will take care that the mock lookup service is injected instead of the lookup service impl. Okay, that's the Google Juice way. let's get to the Spring way. Spring way is not that much different. The Lookup Service is exactly alike. There's no difference here. That's the easy part. The Lookup Service implementation looks a little bit different. Why is that? First, we have a service annotation up here, which comes from the Spring framework. This declares, or this tells the Spring framework that we have a service layer class here. We also have a scope, can define a scope, and I've set the scope to singleton again. Remember, we had singleton annotation in the Juice framework too. Which means this Lookup Service implementation exists only once throughout all classes that use this service. They all use the same Lookup Service implementation. In our case, there is only one. In this project, I don't have the Guava code dependency, which means I have to use something different here for instantiating this animal collection, our data store. So there's a difference where you can see that I don't have this convenience method of lists.createList. I used arrays as list here as convenience. The implementation should be exactly the same. I just recognized this equals method is a little bit different. The other one was equals ignore case, which doesn't make that much of a difference. Okay, now let's take a look at the animal service. Lookup service, still a singleton, has a service annotation. Animal service, of course, this also has a service annotation because it's supposed to be a service in the Spring framework. Now this has a different scope. Here the scope is prototype, which means this animal service will be created every time it is used. What else is different? Over here, at the constructor level, you see that we use an auto-wired annotation. It's not javax inject, or in the Google case, let's go back and take a look at that. Animal service, Google inject. You have, I didn't tell you. You could also use javax.inject. Inject. That's the same or almost the same annotation from the specification, and the com Google inject is an implementation exactly alike as the auto-wired. It's also an implementation of the inject annotation. They mean the same thing. So the auto-wired annotation means if you call or if the dependency injection framework scans this class, it scans the animal service class, it will see that on constructing, in order to construct this class, it needs a lookup service, and this lookup service is to be provided by the dependency injection framework. Okay, the implementation of the take care animal is exactly alike. And of course, in the Spring framework, we too need a setup. So let's take a look at the Spring application first with the main method. This is the way to fire up Spring dependency injection framework. In Spring, what we saw in Juice was called injector. In Spring, it's called a context. In this case, I used an annotation config application context. That is, I wanted to use annotations. There are different ways of configuring Spring applications. You could also use an XML configuration, which I don't want to use anymore. I rather prefer the annotation-based initialization. Okay, so I created a context. Again, I have to provide it with a configuration. Let's put those two classes side by side so that you can see the difference. Okay, now you can see what's going on here. The main is the same thing. So what we had before was an injector. The injector is now a context in the Spring world. I have to register this configuration. That's what Juice does with the module. I think we take a look at the configuration in a second, but it does the same thing basically. So it tells me what beans are known. A bean in the dependency context is always a class that uses dependency injection, that can be used for dependency injection. I have to call refresh here because I used this manual context. In this manual context, I have to register this with the Spring configuration and then refresh it. Of course, as I said before, there are ways that this is done automatically, which means I can create a context that will do a package scan, for example, and which will just take a look at every class in a certain package that you can configure. You can tell it, take a look at all the service annotated classes, take those and please register them in the context automatically. This is the manual way. I've done that here too, so that you can see the difference between the two frameworks. Well, the last two lines, they are pretty much the same. From the context, I get a bean called animal service class in the Spring way, and from the injector, I can call an instance animal service class, but they do the same thing. So the context knows if I want the bean with an animal service class, it will go ahead, take a look if it already knows this class. If not, it will create one. It will create an instance, an object of the animal service, and provide it to me. I can call this method here. Let's see if I'm right. Call this other project Spring. I provided it with the application plugin from Gradle, which makes it runnable. And as we can see, the application context fires up, it's refreshed, and the animal service prints out the same two lines as before. A class dog with a name called Molly was found, and a cat with a name Molly was found. So the difference between Spring and Juice are actually just in the names. Okay. Now what I've not shown you yet is the Spring configuration. Spring configuration is defined, or the Spring framework looks for it with the configuration annotation. You declare a bean, the lookup service, and again, just as in the Juice example, I have to tell the framework that if someone looks for a lookup service, then please provide it with a lookup service implementation. And the animal service is created here with the lookup service as parameter. So this bean gets injected here and gets carried on. Okay, that's what I wanted to tell you today. That's the showcase for the basic setup of dependency injection, comparison of the two frameworks. Now this is all pretty much the manual way. What I would ask you to do is take a look at the website of Spring. I prepared that here too. It's projects.spring.io/Spring framework. Or if you go to the Spring.io, you find it in projects. You have a list of all the main projects of the Spring environment, and we want the Spring framework. Please take a look at this quick start. Please read through this dependency injection feature, how it also works, because they provide you with further information on how to configure a application. Here you have an application also with a configuration. Here you have an example with a component scan, so you don't have to declare every bean for yourself. Also have a main method within context. In this case, they did not use the register and refresh because they have this component scan up here. And yeah, that's the main difference between the example I showed you and the basic example on the front page. I would like you to take this quick start session and please read on in this Spring Framework stuff. Okay, thank you very much and see you next time.